This flawless porcelain was paid for with blood. These walls were built on the ruins of an empire. In June of 1815, one man, after receiving a secret message from the battlefield of Waterloo, brought the entire London Stock Exchange to its knees. With a stone-cold face, he began to sell. Panic, ruin, collapse, while his agents secretly bought up everything for pennies on the dollar. This was a weapon that today you would call insider trading on an epic scale. On this money, born from panic and bonds, this palace was built. But the most important question is, why? Why was all this ruthless financial power directed toward a single, completely irrational goal? I will show you how a man who tried to buy himself immortality built the perfect fortress. But he failed to consider that the greatest threat always comes from within. This place feels timeless. Waddesdon Manor, frozen on its hill in Buckinghamshire, as if lifted from the pages of a fairy tale. Perfect lawns where children laugh. Priceless Sèvres porcelain, reflecting the admiring gazes of thousands of tourists. It is a jewel of the National Trust, a symbol of British heritage, open to and beloved by all. We think we know this story, the story of beauty, preserved for the nation. But if you listen closely, through the rustle of ancient trees and the enthusiastic buzz of the crowd, you can hear another sound, a scratching, insistent voice from the past, the voice of Victorian England, which looked upon this hill with entirely different feelings. Monstrously tasteless, so they hissed in the clubs of London. A gaudy display of wealth, so they wrote in satirical magazines, depicting the owner as a spider spinning a golden web. An insult to the English landscape. This was the verdict of those who believed that English land could be inherited by right of blood, but never bought with money, especially that kind of money. Look at this portrait. Baron Ferdinand de Rothschild. He looks out at us from his gilded frame not as a triumphant victor, but as an eternal melancholic, a ghost in his own paradise. It was he, a Parisian from the Viennese branch of the powerful clan, who dared to erect this French chateau in the very heart of Old England. He built not a house, but a challenge, and the challenge was accepted. Today, we see harmony. But 150 years ago, his contemporaries saw conflict, a conflict of tastes, capital, and civilizations. This manor did not fit into the landscape. It was imposed upon it with incredible force, changing the very skyline. It wasn't built from local stone. It was assembled, like a precious mosaic, from fragments of another country, another history. Its walls concealed the most advanced technologies of the 19th century, yet its master had a mortal fear of one thing: electric light. So how did this transformation happen? How did a palace, branded a monument to bad taste, built by an outsider with despised money, become one of Britain's most adored symbols? How did the personal fortress of a man trying to buy himself a history transform into a national treasure? What do we fail to see behind this magnificent facade? What was the price paid for this beauty? To understand this, we must take a journey not only into this house's past, but into the darkest and bloodiest corners of European history, where the capital was forged that could bend both nature and the aristocracy to its will. He built his fortress. But he failed to consider that the greatest threat comes not from the outside, but from within, from the silence of empty corridors and from the depths of his own heart, in which there was no one left for whom it was worth lighting 1,000 candles in these lavish halls. Every object in these rooms has its price, but it is not measured in pounds sterling. This carved French commode, this silk upholstery, this flawless porcelain that once belonged to a queen, their true value was determined not at auctions in Paris, but in the mud and blood of battlefields across Europe. The foundation of Waddesdon is not stone brought from Bath. Its true foundation is the chaos of the Napoleonic Wars. To understand this house, you must forget about bankers in quiet offices. You need to see a different picture. A picture where the 5 Rothschild brothers, sent by their father from the Frankfurt ghetto to the 5 financial capitals of Europe, create not a bank, but the nervous system of a continent. Their weapon is not cannons, but information. Pigeons fly over battlefields, carrying coded messages. Couriers gallop through the night, outpacing government dispatches. Gold in wine barrels crosses the English Channel to pay Wellington's army, bypassing the French blockade. This isn't just business. It is the financing of war, turned into an exact science. The Rothschilds lent money to kings and empires, often playing both sides, understanding that in any war, there is only one true victor, the one who controls the debt. The culmination of this strategy came in June of 1815. The London Stock Exchange held its breath, awaiting news from a small place called Waterloo. The future of the British Empire hung by a thread. And at that moment, Nathan Rothschild, head of the London House, receives a message from his agent 24 hours before the British government. Napoleon is defeated. But what does he do? He doesn't start buying up stocks. He walks to his post on the exchange floor and, with a stone-cold face, begins to sell. Panic. If Rothschild is selling, it means Wellington has lost. Everyone rushes to offload their British government bonds. Prices collapse, turning to dust. And at that moment, at the very bottom of the crash, Nathan's agents, acting through proxies, secretly buy up everything. When the official news of the great victory arrives the next day, their fortune skyrockets. This stucco, this parquet, these towers, they were all paid for by a single day of cold, ruthless calculation that crashed the market. On this money, born of blood and bonds, a new power was built. A power that could save the Bank of England from collapse in 1825. A power that gained a monopoly on mercury, without which it's impossible to purify gold. A power that financed the creation of the De Beers Diamond Empire and the development of the Baku oil fields. But the most audacious move was yet to come. 1875. Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli learns that the ruler of Egypt is secretly selling his shares in the Suez Canal, the key to India and the entire British Empire. The money, £4 million sterling, is needed immediately. But Parliament is in recess. The government is powerless. Disraeli makes one phone call. Lionel de Rothschild receives him in his office. He listens in silence and asks only one question. Who is the guarantor? Disraeli replies, the British government. That will suffice, says Rothschild, and he writes a check for £4 million on the Prime Minister's word of honor. This is no longer business. This is a lever that moves empires. It was this capital, cosmopolitan, ruthless, and all-powerful, that Baron Ferdinand inherited. Capital capable of buying kings and canals. And now, Ferdinand was about to direct all of this power toward a single, completely irrational project. He stood on a bare, windswept hill and was about to buy what seemed impossible to buy: history, status, and immortality. Why here? Of all the green and fertile valleys in England, why did Ferdinand de Rothschild choose this bare, waterless, windswept hill? To understand this, we must look not at the architectural plans, but into the soul of the man who commissioned them. The soul of a man who had everything, but felt he belonged nowhere. He was born in Paris, belonged to the Viennese branch of the family, and was trying to put down roots in England. a perpetual outsider with limitless possibilities. And then, in 1866, his world collapsed. His young wife Evelina, his cousin, died in childbirth along with their only son. The entire future he could have imagined turned to dust, and when a man loses his future, he desperately tries to build himself an eternity. Waddesdon is not a house. It is a manifesto, carved in stone. It is a monument he erected to the life that never was, and this monument had to be visible from afar. He was not going to assimilate. He didn't want to build another grand but predictable English country house in the Victorian style. That would have been an admission of defeat. It would have meant asking for permission to enter the exclusive club of the old aristocracy. Ferdinand was not going to ask. He was going to make a statement so loud that it would be heard even in the palaces where he, the son of a Jewish banker, was admitted only as a creditor. And so he made his choice. He hired a French architect, Gabriel Hippolyte Destailleur, a specialist in the chateau of the Loire Valley, and he commissioned from him not an English house, but a French dream, a Renaissance fantasy, quoting the towers of the Château de Chambord, blending them with other masterpieces of French architecture. This was not just a choice of aesthetics. It was a cultural challenge. He looked at insular, island-bound England and said, "Your traditions do not interest me. My cosmopolitan, European taste and my money surpass your inherited blood. Every stone in this wall is a share bought on the stock exchange of cultural superiority." He wasn't building a home. He was building a giant showcase. A showcase for his passion, for his obsession, a collection of 18th century French art. At a time when Victorians valued moralizing and restraint, he was buying up the frivolous treasures that had belonged to Marie Antoinette and Louis XVI. He bought up furniture, tapestries, porcelain, everything that symbolized the overthrown, yet infinitely elegant, Ancien Regime. And the house had to be a worthy setting for these royal relics. He was literally importing a history that his family did not have in England. He embedded entire rooms, taken from crumbling Parisian mansions, into the walls of his new chateau. He was buying the past in bulk. Waddesdon, rising on its artificial plateau, is not just architecture. It is psychology. It is the desperate attempt of a lonely man, crushed by grief, to fill an inner void with external magnificence. He wasn't creating a family nest. He no longer had a family. He was creating a fortress for his treasures and a mausoleum for his hopes. He was building himself an immortality that could be seen, touched, and most importantly, be envied by all those who never considered him one of their own. When we look at Waddesdon today, at its majestic setting, it seems as if nature itself created this pedestal to elevate the chateau upon it. It seems as if this hill had waited for centuries for this very architectural masterpiece. But this is an illusion, one of the most expensive and audacious illusions in English history, because nature was not Ferdinand de Rothschild's ally. It was his first enemy. His vision of a French chateau demanded more than just a beautiful view. It demanded a theatrical stage, a wide, flat plateau from which the walls could soar into the sky, dominating the entire countryside. But the English land offered him only a sloping, rounded summit. For the old aristocracy, this would have been a sign to build differently, to fit into the existing terrain, to enter into a dialogue with the ancestral land. But the Rothschild money did not negotiate with reality. It rewrote it, and the battle began. This wasn't construction. It was terraforming. An army of navvies descended on the hill. Not hundreds, thousands of workers, armed only with pickaxes, shovels, and wheelbarrows. They bit into the hilltop, peeling it back layer by layer like the skin of a giant fruit. It was a Sisyphean task of epic proportions, the muscular power of man challenging geology itself. And alongside them worked the titans of the new 19th century. Steam excavators, mechanical leviathans, roaring and hissing, biting into the earth with their steel jaws with a power never seen before. They devoured the hill, leaving deep wounds behind them from which clay and stone oozed. The centuries untouched landscape of Buckinghamshire writhed under the onslaught of the Industrial Revolution, fueled by limitless capital. Every cubic meter of earth moved was paid for by the profits from deals made in London, Paris, and Vienna. Every strike of the pickaxe was an echo of the financial strike Nathan Rothschild dealt to the stock exchange after Waterloo. Ferdinand did not fit into the landscape. He forced the landscape to bend to his will. He was demonstrating a simple and brutal truth to the old world. If you have enough money, you can change more than just your house. You can change the very skyline. The hilltop was shorn off. The plateau was created. On the bare, wounded earth, the perfect foundation for a dream appeared. But having conquered the land, Ferdinand faced a new, even more intractable problem. How to deliver this dream, tons of stone, marble, and French history, to this man-made mountain, cut off from the rest of the world? An architect's dream is always an engineer's nightmare, and Ferdinand de Rothschild's dream was a nightmare of epic proportions. The perfect plateau had been created, but it was an island in a sea of mud and trackless terrain. How could one deliver thousands of tons of stone, steel, marble, and priceless artifacts to this summit? How to turn a fantasy into reality when the nearest road was a battered country lane? The answer was as audacious as the plan itself. If the world cannot provide you with the necessary infrastructure, you build it yourself. This wasn't just a construction project. It was a full-scale military operation, requiring planning, resources, and absolute command over the terrain. The first strike was made with steel. A private branch line was laid from the nearest railway main line directly to the foot of the hill. This was the project's personal artery, through which trainloads of materials from all over Europe flowed into Buckinghamshire. French roof tiles, Italian marble, steel beams from England's industrial centers, all of it arrived here, turning a quiet rural backwater into a humming industrial hub. Every whistle of the steam engine was a salute to capital, capable of forging its own path through other people's fields and ancient boundary lines. But the steam engine could only deliver its cargo to the foothills. The hardest battle was fought on the last mile, on the steep ascent to the construction site. And here, living machines took the stage, the last titans of a bygone era. 16 giant Percheron horses, specially imported from Normandy. These were not just horses. They were monsters of muscle and will, each weighing over a ton. Their hooves were the size of dinner plates, and their power seemed primeval. We see them, harnessed to specially designed carts. They strain every muscle, their flanks heaving with inhuman effort, steam billowing from their nostrils even on a summer day. Slowly, inch by inch, they haul giant stone blocks weighing several tons up the temporary roads laid out on the slope. The wheels sink into the mud, the teamsters shout, but this living locomotive keeps moving. It was a symphony of muscle and steam, an orchestra conducted by the Rothschild checkbooks. This logistical feat was not merely a solution to an engineering problem. It was another declaration of power. Power not only over the landscape, but over space and time. Ferdinand did not wait for roads to be built. He did not limit himself to local resources. He drew the full might of the industrial age to his hill, forcing it to serve his whim. Building materials flowed to the summit in a continuous stream. An army of workers was already waiting for them, But when the trainloads brought not only stone, but also people who spoke a different language, with different tools and different ideas about work, a new conflict brewed on the construction site. The battle for logistics had been won. The battle of cultures was about to begin. Hundreds of hands raised these walls. The hands of English masons, strong, calloused, accustomed to the local stone and the whims of the local weather. They laid the foundation, they raised it floor by floor, creating the skeleton of the future palace. This was their hill, their land, and though the client was a foreigner, the work was honest and straightforward. And one day, onto the construction site, which resembled a disturbed anthill, a contingent arrived. A contingent from another world. They were French craftsmen, hired by the architect des tailleurs. They had different tools, different clothes, a different language, and most importantly, a different attitude toward their work. They were not builders, they were artists. For the local workers, this was an insult. In their silent world, where strength and reliability were valued, these Parisians seemed like aliens, busy with some incomprehensible fuss. We hear their discontent in letters home, in the records of union officials. We are building the bones of this giant, and they arrive to powder its nose. The French brought with them ready-made stone elements carved in France, garlands, bas-reliefs, window frames. They installed roof tiles brought from across the Channel, laying them with a technique unknown to the English. They worked unhurriedly, with artistic precision, as if oblivious to the rough work that had been done before them. This was not just a construction site. It was a collision of worlds on a single hill, a clash of two artisanal traditions, two national characters. On one side, English steadfastness, on the other, French elegance. And Baron Ferdinand paid for this collision. He paid the French more, demanding from them an impossible precision that matched his vision. And every franc paid to a French master for installing a single carved garland was a silent reproach to the decades of an English mason's experience. The construction site became a Tower of Babel. From one side came the rough speech of Buckinghamshire, from the other, the guttural Parisian accent. They did not understand each other, and they did not want to. This was a foreign invasion, paid for with Rothschild money. A new, alien aesthetic was being forcibly grafted onto the heart of Old England, but the walls continued to rise, and gradually, layer by layer, the work of the French concealed the work of the English. Elegant carved panels covered the rough stonework. A French roof crowned the building constructed by English hands. Outside, French elegance was victorious, creating the flawless facade that Ferdinand had envisioned. But the most significant cultural fault line of this house was invisible to the eye. It was sealed within the walls themselves, hidden behind carved panels and the thickness of the stone. This was a conflict not between the English and the French. It was a conflict between the past and the future, between appearance and essence. Outside, Waddesdon proclaimed its allegiance to the Renaissance. Its stone towers, its carved facades, all of it was a masterful imitation of the 16th century, a respectful bow to the masters of the past. But it was a lie, a magnificent, expensive lie, because behind this historical skin hid a skeleton from the future. Let's slice this house open, as if on an anatomical drawing, and we will see what would have shocked the architects of the Renaissance. Inside these massive walls is hidden a steel frame, an innovative structure for a country house of that time, which allowed for the creation of enormous, light-filled halls and galleries, unencumbered by heavy load-bearing walls. Every stone in this wall is merely a veneer for the steel soul of the industrial age. But the wonders were hidden even deeper. A highly complex 19th century circulatory system was laid within the thickness of the walls and floors. Hundreds of meters of pipes, delivering hot and cold water to the bathrooms and dressing rooms. This was a luxury unthinkable for most English aristocratic homes, which still relied on servants with pitchers. There were even elevators, gliding silently between floors to spare guests the tedious climb up the stairs. Waddesdon was not just a house, it was a machine for comfort, hidden beneath the mask of an ancient castle. And here we find the main paradox. This ultra-modern, technologically perfect building lacked the most important symbol of 19th century progress: electric light. Baron Ferdinand, a man who was not afraid to reshape the landscape and use the boldest engineering solutions, was terrified of one thing: fire. His house was not just a dwelling, it was a treasure trove. Within its walls were priceless tapestries, furniture of Marie Antoinette, paintings by great masters, and the thought that a random spark from the then imperfect electrical wiring could turn it all to ash horrified him. This phobia was stronger than the pull of progress, and so every night, this technological masterpiece plunged into the past. An army of servants would light thousands upon thousands of candles. Gas jets hissed in the corridors, covering the ceilings with a thin layer of soot. In the enormous halls built with steel, living, flickering shadows danced, as if in a real castle from the era of Louis XIV. In the morning, servants had to spend hours wiping away the traces of this nightly darkness, cleaning the furniture and walls of soot. It was a house torn by contradiction, a house that looked to the past but was built with the technologies of the future, a fortress of a house equipped with the latest engineering achievements that was lit just as it had been hundreds of years ago. And this paradox was a reflection of its owner's soul, a man who used the full power of modern capital to surround himself with the ghosts of a bygone aristocracy. But to make this illusion complete, he needed more than just walls and technology. He needed the very soul of old France, and he sent his agents on the hunt. New money always craves old walls, but Ferdinand de Rothschild went further. He didn't just want his walls to look old. He wanted them to have a memory. He wanted them to whisper stories of kings and marquises, of balls and intrigues at the French court. And if you cannot inherit such a history, you can buy it. But for that, you need a special breed of hunters. Imagine these men, Rothschild's agents, scouring all of France. They are not just antique dealers. They are detectives, historians, and in a way, vultures. They circle over crumbling aristocratic nests, over chateaux and Parisian mansions whose owners lost their fortunes at the card table or were swept away by yet another revolution. They are not looking for a single chair or a chest of drawers. Their target is larger. Their target is the soul. They enter dusty, abandoned halls where the ghosts of the past still linger, and their professional gaze assesses not the furniture, but the walls themselves. Carved 18th century oak panels, boiserie, covered in faded gilt. Marble fireplaces where fires once burned for the king's mistresses. Parquet floors that creaked under the slippers of court ladies. This is their prey. And so begins an operation akin to the most complex surgery. We see a team of craftsmen, like a surgical team, carefully, panel by panel, dismantling an entire room. Each detail is numbered, packed in straw and wood, and sent on a long journey across the English Channel. This isn't collecting. It is a transplantation. The transplantation of aristocratic DNA from an old, dying body into a new, powerful one being erected on an English hill. Every such fireplace, every panel installed into the brand new walls of Waddesdon was an act of cultural appropriation. Ferdinand was not just decorating his house. He was sewing a ready-made history into it. He was creating the illusion that his chateau was not a new build, but a genuine historical place, merely relocated at his will from the Loire Valley to the heart of Buckinghamshire. Guests entering these rooms were meant to feel the breath of centuries, never suspecting that this past had been bought at auction just a few months prior. This was the most audacious of all his investments, an investment in authenticity. Every creak of that parquet floor was paid for with a check from the Rothschild bank. Every crackle in the gilt was part of a meticulously planned strategy. He was not building a house, but a stage set for his life, and this stage set had to be flawless. He imported the souls of French mansions to fill the emptiness in his own. But even the most beautiful sets are useless if they have no life. And life requires water. On the waterless hill where he was building his paradise, this simple truth threatened to turn his entire titanic project into a dry, dead monument to human hubris. A new, desperate battle began. A battle not with stone, but with the earth itself. For any builder, it's an axiom: no water, no life. But for Ferdinand de Rothschild, this was more than just a matter of supplying a house. Water was the fuel for his dream. It was needed to feed the fountains that were meant to rival Versailles. It was needed to water the exotic gardens he planned to create on the hillsides. It was needed to fill the bathtubs in dozens of guest rooms. And the hill was dry, bone dry. Nature, which he had so demonstratively conquered by leveling the summit, was striking back. It denied him the most essential thing. And at that moment, the entire project, this whole mountain of stone and ambition, was on the brink of catastrophe. You can buy French paneling and hire the best craftsmen, but you can't command water to flow where there is none. Or can you? A desperate geological exploration began. Drilling rigs were brought to the hill, hulking, noisy machines that gnawed into the chalky rock of Buckinghamshire day and night. For the local farmers, accustomed to hand-dug wells, this was akin to black magic. The metal monsters hammered and screeched, piercing the earth in search of hidden arteries. Week after week went by. The drill went deeper and deeper, passing through layer after layer, but the ground remained stubbornly dry. It was a high-stakes gamble. Every foot of drilling meant enormous expense. Every failed borehole was another step toward failure. It seemed as though nature was on the verge of victory. And then one day, at a depth of hundreds of feet, the drill bit broke through into a void, and water gushed to the surface. It was a victory, but only the first in this war. One source was not enough. The drilling continued until an entire network of underground aquifers was found. Then the next phase began, the creation of a highly complex engineering system. Powerful steam-powered pumping stations were built. These mechanical hearts began to pump water from deep within the earth upwards into giant reservoirs hidden at the highest point of the estate. It was a triumph of Victorian engineering. They didn't just find water. They forced it to flow uphill, against all laws of gravity, obeying only the will of man and the power of steam. Every drop that shoots from Waddesdon's fountains today is a drop won back from nature. It was paid for not just with money, but with a persistence bordering on obsession. Rothschild proved that his capital could not only move earth, but also force it to give up its most hidden secrets. Now he had water, he had walls, but something was still missing. Looking out the window of his castle in progress, he didn't see an ancient park, but bare earth, strewn with construction debris and young saplings. The aristocracy measures history in the generations it takes to grow a park. Ferdinand didn't have those generations, and he wasn't going to wait. He decided to buy himself not only history, but time itself. There are some things, it seemed, that even the Rothschilds' money could not accelerate. The growth of a tree, the formation of a landscape, the creation of that noble, centuries-old park that surrounds every ancestral home of the English aristocracy. Such a park is a living testament to the continuity of generations. A great-grandfather plants it, and only his great-grandson enjoys its shade. It is a symbol of patience and of being rooted in the land. But Ferdinand de Rothschild was deprived of this primary aristocratic resource: time. He had no ancestors to plant this park, nor any heirs who would see it flourish. He was a man of the present moment, desperate to see his dream completed within his lifetime. And he was not going to wait decades. He wanted a finished, mature park, immediately. What followed was, perhaps, the most vivid and shocking demonstration of his ambition. He decided not to plant trees. He decided to move them. Across England, and even on the continent, his agents sought out and purchased thousands of fully grown, mature trees. Giant oaks, majestic beeches, sprawling chestnuts. Trees that were 50, 70, and sometimes even 100 years old. And then began an operation comparable in complexity to moving Egyptian obelisks. We see it in engravings of the time, in the reports of his gardeners. Teams of workers would spend weeks digging around a giant tree, trying to preserve the enormous, multi-ton root ball intact. Then, a specially designed wagon, a massive platform on wheels, was positioned under this root ball, pulled by a team of 10 or even 20 horses. And so, this surreal spectacle crawled slowly along the roads of Buckinghamshire, a forest in motion, a huge tree torn from its native soil, making its final journey to become part of the living scenery in a new magnate's park. For the local people, this was almost sacrilege, an interference with the natural order of things, a violation of the very flow of time. It was the most brazen metaphor for the power of new money. If you can't inherit history, you can buy it and have it moved. If you don't have time to grow a century-old oak, you simply buy a century-old oak. Every leaf on those transplanted trees was paid for. Every shadow they cast on the perfect lawns was acquired for cash. Ferdinand wasn't creating a park. He was creating an instant past. He surrounded his castle with an illusion of permanence, assembled from fragments of other people's histories and other people's landscapes. And while his army of gardeners was transforming a bare hill into a mature Eden, another army, an army of journalists and caricaturists in London, was preparing to strike. The walls grew, the trees took their places, but along with them, public resentment also grew. The battle for the hill had been won. The battle for his reputation was just beginning. While on that Buckinghamshire hill, the Rothschild money was conquering nature, a storm was brewing in the clubs and newspaper offices of London. This wasn't just an architectural project. For many, it became a symbol of everything that frightened and irritated Victorian England in the new Gilded Age. And the press, keenly sensing these sentiments, found its perfect target. The war began on the pages of satirical magazines. In scathing caricatures, Ferdinand de Rothschild was depicted not as a patron of the arts, but as a sinister foreign spider, spinning his golden web over the English countryside. He was portrayed as a King Midas, turning everything he touched not simply into gold, but into a gaudy, tasteless gilt. Every report from the construction site, every piece of news about another century-old oak being transplanted, or French craftsmen being imported, became the pretext for a new wave of vitriolic commentary. The conflict went beyond aesthetics. It was a battle between old agrarian England, based on blood right and inherited land, against the new, cosmopolitan force of faceless capital. The most ferocious attacks came from the pages of the popular magazine Truth. Its editor, Henry Labouchere, himself a member of Parliament, saw the Rothschilds as a threat to the very British way of life. He did not mince his words. Waddesdon was branded as financial tastelessness, as a monstrous monument to wealth, erected by a man whose money was made from European wars and stock market speculation, not from the honest labor of an English landowner. Behind these attacks lurked not only snobbery, but also a deep-rooted anti-Semitism. To his critics, Ferdinand wasn't just a nouveau riche. He was a representative of that sixth great power of Europe, the international financial clique that had no homeland, no flag, and no loyalty to anyone but its own profit. And his French chateau on an English hill was perceived not as an eccentricity, but as an act of cultural aggression, as a defiant statement that money could buy anything, even the heart of England. Ferdinand read these articles. He saw these caricatures. And the louder the voices of discontent grew, the higher and more opulent the walls of his castle became. He answered his critics not with words, but with stone and marble. He was building his fortress not only against the winds, but against public opinion. But even inside this fortress, in its very architecture, he was forced to make concessions to Victorian morality. His most distinguished and influential guests were men with complicated reputations, and their comfort required a special space, hidden from prying eyes. And so, a final, most telling addition was made to the project. Construction was nearing its end. The main wing of the chateau already gleamed with French elegance, ready to host royalty and the crème de la crème of British politics. But something was missing. A space that was invisible, yet absolutely essential for the social game Ferdinand was orchestrating. His most important guest, his social pass into high society, was the Prince of Wales, the future King Edward VII, and the prince and his circle, the so-called Marlborough house set, valued not only luxury, but also freedom. Freedom from the suffocating corsets of Victorian morality. The freedom to smoke cigars wherever they pleased, to play cards for money until dawn, and to have conversations not meant for ladies' ears. In a typical aristocratic house, this created a problem. After dinner, the ladies would withdraw to the drawing room, while the gentlemen remained in the dining room or moved to the smoking room. But at Waddesdon, where receptions were on a royal scale, this was not enough. A whole separate universe was needed. And so, a special bachelor's wing was added to the main building. The name itself was a brilliant euphemism. It was intended not only for bachelors, but for all married gentlemen who for a time wished to feel free. This was a realm of masculine pleasures, architecturally separate from the main, respectable house. Here, there were spacious billiard rooms where the clatter of balls wouldn't disturb the ladies' sleep, smoking rooms with deep leather armchairs and powerful ventilation where one could indulge in tobacco without offending the female half, card tables where fortunes were won and lost. Here, architecture served not just as a wall, but as a moral screen. It created a physical boundary between two worlds, the official facade of Victorian hospitality and the hidden, informal life of the British elite. Every detail in this wing was designed for the comfort of its occupants. Separate bedrooms, bathrooms, its own staff of servants. A guest could spend the entire weekend here, barely interacting with the ladies, except for formal lunches and dinners. It was the perfect gentleman's club, built into a country house. The bachelor's wing is a social code frozen in stone. It tells us more about Victorian society than hundreds of books. About its double standards, its unwritten rules, its need to create parallel realities where men could be men without upsetting the fragile balance of propriety. The construction was complete. The fortress was ready. All that remained was to fill it with life, to light 1,000 candles and let in the guests. The triumph seemed absolute. But behind the glitter of receptions and the clamor of balls, the shadow of an inevitable melancholy was already lurking. The house was built. But for whom? And the house came to life. 10 years of construction, titanic efforts, and ruthless spending were over. Waddesdon ceased to be a construction site and became the most dazzling stage in Victorian England. An invitation here became the ultimate sign of social acceptance. Here, unspoken politics were conducted, alliances were forged, and the fortunes of prime ministers and princes depended directly on the favor of the host. The apotheosis, Ferdinand's absolute triumph, was the visit of Queen Victoria in 1890. The Queen herself, ruler of the empire, who rarely stayed with subjects not belonging to the hereditary aristocracy, bestowed this honor upon him. It was the final capitulation of the old world to the power of new money. On that day, the son of a Viennese banker stood on equal footing with the most ancient families of England. For the elderly Queen, this visit was a journey into the future. Here, at Waddesdon, she used an elevator for the first time in her life. And with childlike wonder, she gazed at the electric light. Ferdinand, overcoming his own fear, had ordered electricity to be installed and switched on in Her Majesty's honor. Waddesdon proved that it was not just more luxurious, but also more modern than any of the royal palaces. But behind the brilliant facade of formal receptions lay another reality. Life at Waddesdon was governed by a strict, almost military routine. Upon arrival, guests received cards with a daily schedule, regulated down to the minute. Breakfast at 9, a walk at 11, lunch at precisely 2. Ferdinand, an obsessive perfectionist, had turned his paradise into a gilded cage. His pedantry was legendary and exhausting. He could cause a scene over a single wilted flower in a vase or an improperly served dish. Luxury had its price. It demanded absolute submission to the host's will. And through all this splendor, through the laughter of guests and the clinking of glasses, a deep, ineradicable melancholy seeped through. The shadow of the personal tragedy that had given birth to this chateau had never disappeared. It lived within it. Ferdinand often secluded himself in his private tower study, far from the noisy receptions, surrounded by his most precious treasures. He had achieved everything he wanted. He had outshone the aristocracy. He had hosted the Queen. He had built the most perfect house in England. But he was alone in it. This palace, created as a monument to his deceased wife and son, was a paradise with no one to inherit it. It had no future. And in the silence of the vast, empty halls at night, he must have realized the cruel irony of his fate. He had built the greatest family nest in history, but he no longer had a family. In 1898, Ferdinand died. The house and its fate passed into other hands, and soon it would face a trial that hundreds of other aristocratic estates had failed to withstand, the trial of war and time. Ferdinand's death could have been the end for Waddesdon. Such houses, created by the will of a single person, often fade away with their creator. But it passed into the hands of his sister, Alice de Rothschild, and that was its salvation. Alice, unmarried, imperious, and an even greater perfectionist than her brother, saw her mission not in changing, but in preserving. She became the high priestess in the temple built by Ferdinand. she preserved his legacy by introducing legendary rules for the care of the collection, known as Miss Alice's Pouses, a strict code of cleanliness and order that is still followed to this day. The house froze, becoming a perfect museum, untouched by time. But time cannot be stopped, and soon the roar of engines and the thunder of cannons on the continent reached the idyllic hills of Buckinghamshire. A true turning point had arrived, the Second World War. And Waddesdon, this symbol of excessive luxury, suddenly found a completely new, unexpected purpose. We see these images, full of surreal contrast. Barefoot children now run across the luxurious parquet floors where the slippers of court ladies once tread. 100 children, evacuated from London to escape the bombing, found refuge within these walls. Their ringing voices echoed through halls built for the whispers of aristocrats. The chateau, created as a monument to one deceased child, now gave shelter to 100 living ones. But the most incredible thing was happening deep underground, in the wine cellars. There, under the cover of strictest secrecy, truck after truck began to bring treasures. But not the Rothschilds' treasures. Priceless masterpieces from the royal collection were moved to Waddesdon for safekeeping, saving them from the German bombs that rained down on Buckingham Palace. A remarkable historical inversion occurred. Waddesdon, built to rival kings, to prove that money could buy taste superior to royalties, now became the guardian of their heritage. Paintings by Rembrandt and Rubens, belonging to the British Crown, were hidden in the cellars dug with the money of Jewish bankers. The outsider's house became the last refuge for the treasures of the establishment. In the nation's hour of greatest peril, Waddesdon ceased to be mere private property. It began to serve Britain. The war ended. The children returned to London, the paintings to the royal palaces. But the world had changed forever. And for Waddesdon, as for hundreds of other great estates, the darkest hour had come. The new post-war Britain, with its crushing inheritance taxes, began to systematically dismantle the very aristocratic world that Ferdinand had so eagerly sought to emulate. The palace was doomed. And then the Rothschild family, true to their history, prepared to make their final and most brilliant financial move. Post-war England was a graveyard of great houses. Centuries-old estates, which had survived wars and revolutions, fell one by one to a new, invisible enemy, the inheritance tax. The aristocracy sold off their treasures, lead was stripped from the roofs, and the parks became overgrown with weeds. The fate of Waddesdon seemed sealed. This, the most expensive and luxurious of houses, was also the most vulnerable. Its upkeep required a fortune that the post-war heirs no longer possessed. And here, on the edge of the abyss, the Rothschild family did what they did best. They made a deal. Not with a bank, not with the government. They made a deal with history itself. In 1957, James de Rothschild, who had inherited the estate, made a move that stunned everyone with its audacity and foresight. He didn't sell off Waddesdon piece by piece. He didn't turn it into a hotel or a school. He gifted it to the nation. The entire house, with its priceless collection and 165 acres of parkland, was transferred to the ownership of the National Trust. But that was only half of the deal. Along with the house, he also handed over the largest donation in the Trust's history at that time, £750,000 sterling, a colossal sum intended for the estate's perpetual upkeep. This was not just an act of philanthropy. It was a cold, brilliant calculation, worthy of his ancestors who played the stock market after Waterloo. Because the will contained one, most important clause, a condition that turned this gift into a masterpiece of financial strategy. Yes, the house belonged to the nation, but its management, the control over its development, and the preservation of its spirit that would forever remain with the Rothschild family trust. It was their final, most cunning deal. They gave away their treasure in order to preserve it forever. They shifted the burden of its upkeep onto the shoulders of the state and benefactors, but retained the right to make all key decisions. They transformed a symbol of personal, disputed ambition into an undisputed national treasure, and in the process, secured perpetual control over their own legacy. Final shot. Lord Rothschild, a descendant of the family today, walking along the perfect paths of the park. The house survived. It is thriving. It is beloved by millions, but it survived not because it was the most beautiful, but because its owners, until the very end, managed it just as they managed their capital, with a ruthless eye on the future. And herein lies the main paradox of Waddesdon. The palace, built to challenge the English aristocracy, survived only because its creators ultimately proved to be smarter and more far-sighted than all those they once so desperately envied. And so the story of a mansion, born of audacity, grief, and ruthless capital, comes full circle. What began as a challenge to Old England, as a monument to an outsider's taste, has over time become an inseparable part of it, transforming from a symbol of discord into an object of universal affection. We come here to admire the beauty, forgetting that it was built as a demonstration of power. And looking at these perfect towers today, one can't help but wonder, can beauty born of cold calculation and paid for with the blood of history redeem its own origins? Or do we, the viewers, become the final parties to the deal, exchanging our admiration for oblivion to the price that was once paid? This story has no simple answer, and that is precisely why your perspective is so important. Share your thoughts in the comments, because it is in this dialogue about the past that we find meaning for the present. If this journey has made you think, support us with a subscription and a like, so we can continue to tell the stories hidden behind magnificent facades.